Hello, this is Mark Greyer. For the next hour, I'll be reading from the February 19th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, first article for today. U.S. military moves into place for possible strikes on Iran. President Trump has given no indication that he has made a decision about how to proceed as diplomatic talks continue. The rapid buildup of U.S. forces in the Middle East has progressed to the point that President Trump has the option to take military action against Iran as soon as this weekend, administration and Pentagon officials said, leaving the White House with high stakes choices about pursuing diplomacy or war. Mr. Trump has given no indication that he has made a decision about how to proceed, but the drive to assemble a military force capable of striking Iran's nuclear program, its ballistic missiles, and accompanying launch sites has continued this week despite indirect talks between the two nations on Tuesday, with Iran seeking 2 weeks to come back with fleshed out proposals for a diplomatic resolution. Mr. Trump has repeatedly demanded that Iran give up its nuclear program, including agreeing not to enrich any more uranium. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, whose country would potentially take part in an attack, has been pushing for action to weaken Iran's ability to launch missiles at Israel. Israeli forces, which have been on heightened alert for weeks, have been making more preparations for a possible war, and a meeting of Israeli's security cabinet was moved to Sunday from Thursday, according to two Israeli defense officials. Many administration officials have expressed skepticism about the prospects of reaching a diplomatic deal with Tehran. The indirect talks on Tuesday in Geneva ended with what Iran's foreign minister said was agreement on a set of guiding principles. U.S. officials said the two sides made progress, but added the big gaps remain. Mr. Trump has repeatedly threatened that Iran must meet his terms or face severe consequences. But another attack, 8 months after a 12-day war in which Israel and the United States assaulted military and nuclear sites across Iran, would potentially carry substantial risks, including that Iran would respond with a ferocious barrage of missile strikes on Israel and on U.S. forces in the region. For a president who ran for office promising to keep the United States out of war, Mr. Trump is now considering what would be at least the seventh American military attack in another country in the past year, and his second on Iran. Last June, after striking three Iranian nuclear sites, Mr. Trump declared that Iran's nuclear program had been obliterated. But now he is considering sending U.S. troops back to continue the job. But unlike the U.S. Israeli assault last June, Mr. Trump's objectives now are less clear. The U.S. military buildup includes dozens of refueling tankers rushed to the region by United States Central Command, more than 50 additional fighter jets, and two aircraft carrier strike groups, complete with their accompanying destroyers, cruisers, and submarines, U.S. officials said. The aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford, fresh from the Caribbean, where it was part of a naval fleet pressuring the Venezuelan government of President Nicolas Maduro, was approaching Gibraltar on Wednesday as it made its way to join the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln in the region. The president has always been very clear, though, with respect to Iran or any country around the world, diplomacy is always his first option. And Iran would be very wise to make a deal with President Trump and with his administration, Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, said on Wednesday. He's always thinking about what's in the best interest of the United States of America, of our military, of American people. and that's how he makes decisions with respect to military action, she added. In Israel, the two defense officials said that significant preparations were underway for the possibility of a joint strike with the United States, even though no decision has been made about whether to carry out such an attack. They said the planning envisions delivering a severe blow over a number of days with the goal of forcing Iran into concession at the negotiating table that it has so far been unwilling to make. The U.S. buildup suggests an array of possible Iranian targets, including short and medium range missiles, storage depots, nuclear sites, and other military targets, such as headquarters of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard troops. The ultimate decision on scope of targets is largely up to Mr. Trump, U.S. officials said. Administration and military officials said the United States has bolstered its defensive assets since the president initially threatened to strike Iran in January. At the time, Mr. Trump had requested options to respond to the Iranian government's bloody crackdown on protests. But more recently, he has threatened to attack if Iran failed to reach a deal to limit its nuclear program and said that a massive armada was heading toward the country. Despite Mr. Trump's tough stance, the Pentagon last month was in a poor position to back him up. The 30,000 to 40,000 U.S. troops scattered around the Middle East, including at 8 permanent bases, were low on air defenses to protect them from expected retaliation. The additional fighter jets necessary to conduct the kind of operation Mr. Trump spoke of were idling at American bases in Europe and as far away as the United States. Much of the military hardware in the Middle East, accumulated over 20 years of war, had since departed the region. But over the past month, the U.S. military has moved the necessary air defenses, including Patriot missile defense and terminal high altitude area defense systems into the region. Both systems can interrupt Iranian ballistic missiles. One military official said the U.S. military could now defend its troops, allies, and assets from any Iranian retaliation for American strikes on its nuclear and military targets, at least for a short campaign. But, the official said, the question remains as to whether the American military is ready to sustain a larger and wider war. The American buildup also includes dozens of additional F-35, F-22, and F-16 fighter jets that have been flown from the United States to Europe and onward to the Middle East in recent days, according to flight tracking data and U.S. officials. Dozens of refueling planes, vital for a prolonged air campaign, have also been moved forward, these officials had said. The second aircraft carrier, the Gerald R. Ford, and its 3 destroyer escorts could be in the Mediterranean by the weekend or earlier next week, military officials said. The Ford is likely to be deployed initially near the coast of Israel to defend Tel Aviv and other Israeli cities and towns, officials said. A military official said on Wednesday that the carriers have their own defense systems, including accompanying destroyers that can shoot down missiles aimed at them. It is difficult to hit an aircraft carrier with a ballistic missile, he said, if the carrier is moving rapidly. American B-2 bombers, which were used last year when Mr. Trump struck Iran, and other U.S.-based long-range bombers are on the higher alert status, officials said. Senior national security officials have told the president that any operation that aims to change the Iranian leadership is not guaranteed to be a success. Mr. Trump's decision to put off his threatened Iran strikes last month, which 2 administration officials said came after military officials cautioned him that the Pentagon wasn't ready, may have allowed Iran to better prepare for an attack. Diplomacy may give the U.S. more time to get its military ready, but it also gives Iran more time to plan its retaliation, said Vali Nasser, an Iran expert at Johns Hopkins University. Ultimately, he added, the president has to weigh the cost of attacking Iran. Ironically, his approach has made those costs more likely. Okay, moving on. Next article. Europe worries about another Trump blowup, this one on tech. Even as trade tensions between the United States and the European Union seem to calm, officials are concerned that a showdown is brewing over the bloc's digital rules. After a year filled with trade related drama between the United States and the European Union, one outstanding gripe still has potential to fuel the fire: how the bloc regulates technology. At the heart of that dispute is the bloc's Digital Services Act, which requires big technology companies to take steps to prevent illegal or dangerous content on their platforms. The Trump administration, arguing that the regulations impede free speech and put up unfair barriers to American firms, has warned repeatedly that it could retaliate. Now, European officials are beginning to fret, privately and in public, that this is merely the calm before the next Trump created storm. The U.S. will, in the coming months, that's certain, attack us over digital regulation, President Emmanuel Macron of France told several European news outlets in an interview this month, suggesting that the United States could hit the European Union with tariffs related to the Digital Services Act. The Trump administration has recently echoed that prediction. Europe's online services regulation has become almost like a digital speed trap to try and fine American companies, David Sachs, a White House official, had said on his All In podcast last month. You could argue that it's effectively like a tariff on American tech companies operating in Europe, he added. If that's the case, well, I mean, I guess Europe is allowed to have tariffs, but then that's going to change the tariffs that we set. Sarah Rogers, the Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy at the State Department and a guest on that podcast episode, agreed that a lot of Americans see this as a tax. Bill White, the U.S. ambassador to Belgium, said in an interview that Michael Regis, a top State Department official, would come to Brussels in early March, in part to discuss free speech and digital regulation with European Union officials. The State Department press office confirmed that he would make the trip and would discuss EU digital regulations. It is not clear what the United States might do if it decided to attack Europe over its digital regulations, or which companies it might target. Some trade experts have suggested that one option would be a 301 investigation, a mechanism under U.S. trade law to fight against unfair foreign trade practices. The tool allows the United States to impose tariffs, fees, or other punishments on countries that are found to have cheated on trade. Mr. Trump has used such an investigation against China, but so far he has wielded other tools against Europe. His use of one trade weapon in particular, a wide reaching mandate that allows for across the board tariffs in the case of national emergency, is now up for review before the Supreme Court, which could rule on the case as soon as Friday. Nor is it clear what precisely would prompt the United States to act, if at all. For months, the Trump administration has vaguely threatened to place tariffs or other penalties on European companies if the bloc continues to enforce its digital rules. The U.S. Office of the Trade Representative suggested in a memorandum last year that it was contemplating how it could punish nations that it thought discriminated against American firms with digital services regulations. In December, the office posted on X that if the EU and EU member states insist on continuing to restrict, limit, and deter the competitiveness of U.S. services providers through discriminatory means, the United States would have no choice but to begin using every tool at its disposal to counter these unreasonable measures. The office noted that American law permits the assessment of fees or restrictions on foreign services in response, among other options. It has previously pointed out that European companies like Accenture, Spotify, and Capgemini operate in the United States, suggesting they could be in the crosshairs. The United States has already imposed travel bans on several people involved in digital regulation, including a former EU official. Asked for comment on this article, the U.S. Trade Office replied that while a U.S. EU trade deal struck last year addressed many issues, the Trump administration still wants to achieve fairness in digital trade and has additional options in negotiation if negotiation doesn't work. But some experts say that the United States is unlikely to follow through on its threats to attack Europe over its technology regulations, in part because tensions between the two trading partners have finally cooled. The European Parliament could next week take another step towards approving the trade deal that was struck last year, and that would apply 15% tariffs to many European goods. I think the threshold for something major is very high, said Jacob Funk Kirkegaard, a senior fellow at Brussels, a Brussels based think tank. Still, Payne Griffin, a senior editor at FTI Consulting, a business advisory firm, said he had received queries from corporate clients about what it would look like if the United States hit back at Europe over its digital rulebook. Based on public comment from U.S. officials, taking action against EU digital services is one of the things they've thought about, he said. EU officials are left weighing whether enforcing the bloc's technology rules is worth further irritating the United States, especially as issues like American involvement in the war in Ukraine hang in the balance. So far, the European Commission, the bloc's executive arm, has said repeatedly that it would not move away from its digital regulations. It has continued to actively enforce them in recent months, despite the Trump administration's threats. In December, the Commission announced that it would issue a fine of 120 million euros, or about $141 million, against X over transparency issues. Regulators in Brussels have also been investigating Google and Meta for possible violations of online competition and safety laws. I want to be very clear. Our digital sovereignty is our digital sovereignty. Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the Commission, said at the Munich Security Conference last week. We have a long tradition in freedom of speech. Actually, the Enlightenment started on our continent. Europe, she said, will not flinch in enforcing its digital rules. You are listening to a reading of articles and features on the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. All right, moving on. Next article. Top concern in avalanche recovery effort is now safety of searchers. Weather and snow conditions will dictate when the bodies of skiers killed in the avalanche near Lake Tahoe can be retrieved from the mountain. More snow is expected. After an avalanche, time is critical for anyone hoping to be rescued from the wall of snow that has been unleashed. But as the hours wear on and search efforts make the grim shift from rescue mission to body recovery, the calculus becomes more complicated. No longer is speed the only imperative, so is the safety of the searchers. That was the situation that confronted officials working to find and evacuate the 15 skiers who were overcome by an avalanche the size of a football field in a rugged stretch of backcountry near Lake Tahoe on Tuesday. 6 members of the group survived and were able to contact rescuers, who made a perilous trek to reach them on Tuesday evening. At least 8 others did not survive, making the avalanche the deadliest in modern California history. Their bodies were found not far from where the survivors had been found. The last member of the group was still missing as of Wednesday afternoon and was presumed dead, officials had said. Initially, the call out was much more high risk, since we had at least 6 survivors, said Ashley Quadros, a spokeswoman for the Nevada County Sheriff's Department, which was leading the search and rescue effort. We're going to take those risks when there's a chance people might not make it through the night. But now, she said, emergency response officials are weighing numerous other factors before sending search teams made up of entirely of volunteers from across the region to continue the work and bring back the bodies of those who were killed. Forecasters have said that heavy snow could continue into Thursday, bringing with it the danger of more avalanches that could both bury remains deeper in snow and engulf rescuers. Experts will continue to test the snowpack regularly to assess whether it is safe for teams to head back to the site of the avalanche. And while officials in the cluster of communities dotted the northern Sierra Nevada have begged drivers, skiers, and others venturing into the backcountry to stay away, there is also the risk that rescuers will be called to other disasters. That prospect, Ms. Quadros said, is another variable that's going to change daily, if not hourly. She said late Wednesday afternoon that almost 2 dozen search and rescue personnel were actively working on the recovery efforts, which she expected to continue into the weekend. Emergency officials said that they were considering using aircraft to reach the victims if the weather improved. The group had been staying in cabins on the remote Frog Lake near Castle Peak, a popular skiing destination, for a 3-day backcountry skiing expedition led by Blackbird Mountain Guides. The skiers, including 4 guides, had been finishing up their expedition in the rugged area when the avalanche occurred. The 6 survivors were able to use a combination of emergency beacons and iPhone SOS functions to contact rescuers who who braved the treacherous conditions to reach them. Sheriff Shannon Moon of Nevada County told reporters on Wednesday during a news conference that she had been in contact with the company, which had provided a trip manifest and other information. She and other local leaders emphasized that the allure of the backcountry stems from its combination of danger and beauty. On Tuesday, it took hours to reach the survivors, in part because a snowcat, a vehicle that runs on tracks like a tank, could not be used to take rescuers all the way to them. The rescuers had to ski the last 2 miles. Extreme weather conditions, I would say, is an understatement, said Sheriff Moon. The community of ski guides and other expert backcountry navigators in the Lake Tahoe area is small and tight knit. They are not unfamiliar with loss. Although none of the victims have been identified, Sheriff Wayne Wu of nearby Placer County told reporters on Wednesday that one of the people who had been killed was the spouse of a member of the Tahoe Nordic Search and Rescue Team. I don't blame people for trying to push their limits. Hardy Bullock, who represents the area on the Nevada County Board of Supervisors, said on Wednesday, "It comes with risk and loss." He said he had friends who had died in avalanches or in bike crashes in other accidents. Across California, emergency agencies rely on mostly volunteer search and rescue teams for a wide array of functions, and they coordinate with one another in a vast network of mutual aid. Many are called upon to scour crime scenes for evidence or to search for lost hikers. In areas where outdoor recreation is popular, search and rescue teams have specialized areas of expertise. For example, along rivers with treacherous currents, they train for swift water rescue. During the summer of wet years, they are often forced to wait for the waters to recede to try to recover bodies of unsuspecting swimmers who slip under the water. Mr. Bullock said that the Lake Tahoe area has one of the most robust search and rescue communities in the country, with a range of teams who know the terrain. Okay, next, in a related article, satellite feature on iPhone allowed skiers to seek help from after the avalanche. The emergency SOS feature on iPhones can send text to emergency responders via satellite when there is no cell tower nearby. Excuse me. The six survivors on Tuesday's avalanche near Lake Tahoe communicated with emergency responders using the emergency SOS feature on the iPhone and an emergency beacon, said Don O'Keefe, the law enforcement chief for California's Office of Emergency Services. The emergency SOS feature on Apple's iPhones allows users to text emergency services even when they don't have cell service or Wi Fi by connecting the phone to a satellite. In this case, the feature allowed the group to stay in touch with the Nevada County Sheriff's Office, which was coordinating the rescue efforts. One of my personnel was communicating with one of the guides over a 4 hour period, giving information back to the Nevada Sheriff's Office and coordinating what rescuers could be permitted. Apple instructs users to try to call an emergency number like 911 first. If that doesn't connect, they can use emergency SOS to send a text message to emergency services via satellite. For an iPhone to reach the satellite, the user should be outside with a clear view of the sky and the horizon. When the phone connects, it sends the text to emergency responders who will ask for information like location, emergency contacts, and the remaining battery life of the phone. All models of the iPhone 14, 15, 16, and 17 have emergency SOS. In the United States, the feature requires the phone to have an operating system of iOS 16.1 or newer. Emergency SOS is free for 2 years after an iPhone is activated. A similar feature allows iPhone users to text their friends and family when they have no cell service or Wi Fi. Android users with some versions of Google's Pixel 9 and all versions of its Pixel 10 can also text emergency services via satellite. Okay, moving on. Next article. These Olympians excel on two types of tracks. Among elite athletes exists an even more exclusive club, people who compete at both the summer and winter games. Many are sprinters who turn to the bobsled. For mere mortals, qualifying for the Olympics would be the achievement of a lifetime. Then there are those who excel in more than one sport, and in disciplines so vastly different that they belong to an even more elite club, participants in the summer and winter games. Roughly 130 people have competed in both over the entire modern history of the Olympics, dating to 1896. The combinations of sports have included sailing and ski jumping, cycling and speed skating, and skateboarding and snowboarding. The most common ticket to the dual season club appears to be track and field and bobsled. Bobsled teams need brakemen and brakewomen who are very strong and very fast to push the heavy sled quickly at the start of the race, hop in and take the ride, and brake at the race's conclusion. Track and field events at the Summer Games are full of muscular, speedy contenders. Salomon Cora, 31, will compete for a two-women Swiss bobsled team this week as a brakeswoman, having tried bobsled for the first time only in November. As a sprinter, Cora competed in the Summer Games, Rio de Janeiro in 2016, Tokyo in 2021, and Paris in 2024. Bobsledders for years have asked her to join them on the ice track, but she never really considered it until last year. I wanted to discover something new, she said. She acknowledged that joining the rarefied club of dual season athletes appealed to her competitive nature. In 2025, with the Winter Olympics around the corner, she thought that it was time to try. That first ride in Cortina d'Ampezzo, Italy, on the same ice track where she will compete in these games starting Friday, did not go well. It was horrible, she said with a laugh. There are G forces pressing your head down. You get some hits from the side, and sometimes the ice is not that smooth. But she gave it a few more tries and came to it like the adrenaline rush and speed. Within several weeks, incredibly, she had qualified for the Olympics. She is so new to the sport that she had never even toppled over in her sled. They say you're only a real bobsledder when you've crashed once, but I'm fine with not being a real bobsledder, she said. Ashley Nelson, a 34-year-old brakewoman from Britain, has been on a similar fast timeline. She sprinted in the Rio de Janeiro and Tokyo Games, but needed surgery on her Achilles tendon in 2023 and did not qualify for the next year's Paris Olympics. I thought my career in elite sports was over, she said. Then she received a fortuitous Instagram message from Adele Nicole, a British shot putter and discus thrower who also races a bobsled. Nicole has not participated in the Summer Olympics, but has done well in other major track and field championships. Nicole needed a brakewoman, and Nelson agreed to give it a try in the fall of 2024. They will compete in the two women bobsled competition this week. I never had this on my bingo card, but here we are, Nelson said. Nelson said she, like Cora, hated her first ride down the bobsled track. It was a bit bumpy and a bit wild, and I go out of the sled and said, "No, I felt sick," she recalled. I called my mom and said, "Mom, this is not for me." But she too came to love it. She said she especially appreciates that so many bobsled athletes are people of color because of the pipeline from track and field. Many winter sports, including skiing and snowboarding, require expensive travel, equipment, and training that can seem out of the reach to many children of color, she said. In the summer games, it's you and your spikes, or you might have the occasional javelin or shot put. It's so accessible, she said. With winter sports, if you don't see people who look like you don't always put yourself out there. In her mind, the winter games don't get as much attention as those in the summer, but she said the sports are spectacular, bordering on dangerous, and should get more attention. I probably got the easier gig here at the Olympics, being a brakewoman. I'm watching everybody else. I'm watching Ilya backflip And I'm like, I could never do that, she continued, referring to the American figure skater Ilya Malinin. Patrick Sale, Cora's coach, who has worked with other track and field and bobsled athletes, said it's easier for women to go back and forth between the two sports than it is for men. Athletes and their sleds are under strict weight requirements, and male sprinters tend to have to bulk up significantly to participate. Women do not have to change their bodies as much and can return to sprinting more easily, he said. While the Olympic dual season club is small, there is an even tinier echelon within it. 7 athletes have won medals in both the summer and winter games. Count the sprinter and bobsledder Alexandra Burkhardt of Germany among them. She won a silver medal in the two-women bobsled race at the Beijing Games in 2022 and a bronze in the 4x100-meter relay in Paris. Adding bobsled to their repertoire was a cherry on the top of the cake, she said, but the sliding sport requires far more hours of training and working on the equipment than sprinting did, and after one season, she was done. Burkhardt, 31, came to Cortina as a fan, but she said she might have one more Olympics left. She is eyeing the Los Angeles Summer Games in 2028, providing her body holds up. I only want to do it as long as I'm having fun, she said. My fire is still burning. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, next article is from the opinion section, an article by Robin Givhan. Why Jesse Jackson wore that turtleneck. The Reverend Jesse Jackson was always a standout in the way he dressed. But whom he dressed for and why are what made him exceptional. By 2008, when he was an elder statesman in the fight for social justice, tearily celebrating Barack Obama's election, Mr. Jackson looked like most of the gray haired men who'd entered the ring in the 1960s and continued to slug it out on behalf of the disenfranchised. He had become a man in a suit, or at least a sports jacket, but worn by him, establishment tailoring looked more like camouflage, perhaps a considered costume, rather than a uniform of convenience or acquaintance or a case of prideful dressing up. From his arrival in the spotlight until his death, Tuesday at 84, his attire always seemed to be telling a story about aspirations for himself and for the country. Even when he was rising through the activist ranks during a time of respectability politics in the 1960s, he didn't adhere to the prescribed sober attire of the time. As a young man, he didn't dress for gravitas, he dressed for urgent upheaval. As the head of the Chicago based Operation PUSH, later renamed the Rainbow Push Coalition, Mr. Jackson was photographed advocating equal economic opportunity wearing the shika, with its origins in West Africa. A tunic-like shirt was a piece with Mr. Jackson's pointed use of African American instead of black. Mr. Jackson's dashiki laid claim to personal heritage and communal history, even if both were specifically defined. Even in the past, was as wispy as a cloud. It was still present. It was real. The clothes confirmed it. Clothes grounded Mr. Jackson's enduring narrative of dignity, possibility, and fairness. They were part of his personal myth making. They helped him tell the story of his accomplishments with a cinematic of flair. He was never quite he was never quiet or a dandy. Excuse me, let's start that over. He was never quite a dandy. He didn't go in for the sophisticated Elon off of political power broker Vernon Jordan, and he was not as flamboyant as the Reverend Al Sharpton during his early rabble rousing days in New York. In his younger years, Mr. Jackson stood out for many of his peers, notably the late Congressman John Lewis, another impatient young activist in the thrall of Martin Luther King Jr. When Mr. Lewis was in the public eye, he looked as if he was headed to a job interview at the local bank. Mr. Jackson dressed with a look at me flair. He was not a classic dresser. His clothes were overtly of their time. Over the years, he represented himself in a turtleneck, a dashiki, a three-piece suit, a leisure suit in short sleeves with epaulets. History associates those who were in the thick of the civil rights movement with suits and ties, a uniform they wore not just to demand respect, but to show how much respect they already had for themselves. On April 4th, 1968, standing on the second floor catwalk of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, after an assassin's bullet hit Dr. King, Mr. Jackson wore an olive turtleneck under his blazer. It was more formal than what the mostly white middle class hippies wore. He did not have the full privilege of being rakishly disheveled. His clothes didn't convey the might of the burgeoning Black Panther Party. They were more relaxed than those of his elders, men who had come of age in the late 1940s and 50s. Clothes identified Mr. Jackson as in between. He was part of a transition. His clothes choices were explanation points to his preacherly oratory. They were an emphatic expression of identity in protest of a history of insurance, irassurance, a testimony of pride and ambition, an individual but not yet free. When he went off to Cuba in 1984 to facilitate the release of American and Cuban prisoners there, Mr. Jackson's short sleeved shirt with epaulets had the cut of Gibraltar, Gibera with hints of the military. It was not a uniform, and it wasn't quite cultural appropriate. It spoke of clout and kinship. It was an example of aesthetic diplomacy. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright practiced it with her studied choice of brooches. Michelle Obama, when she was the First Lady, engaged in aesthetic diplomacy when she considered geography, lineage, and gender as she chose the designers for her state wardrobe. And it is regularly used by every politician who has ever walked onto a union factory floor, slipped off their suit jacket, and rolled up their sleeves in a show of working stiff solidarity. When he fought his way onto the stage of Democratic National Convention after his second run for the presidency in 1988, he was a spokesman for America's enduring optimism. He was dressed in a charcoal suit with a crisp white shirt. His tailored presence didn't signify that he'd arrived at a long sought lofty perch. Rather, his clothes signaled that he had entered a new chapter of credibility. That journey began with Shirley Chisholm, who had run for president in 1972 wearing bold patterns, reveling in the fact that she stood out from her white male colleagues. 16 years later, when Mr. Jackson won presidential primaries and caucuses in the states including Michigan, South Carolina, and Delaware, the word symbolic could no longer be so easily affixed to the campaign of a black person seeking the country's highest office. One of the times the public glimpses of Mr. Jackson was in March. He was in Selma, Alabama to mark the anniversary of Bloody Sunday, the day in 1965 when voting rights activists assembled to walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge and were assaulted by law enforcement. He used a wheelchair and was swaddled against the chill in a black coat and scarf. But even surrounded by able bodied men and women, he was not lost in the crowd. He was there in the middle of all of it, hunkered down. The event was a remembrance, but also a protest. He still had work to do to ensure the rights of all citizens. The image of Mr. Jackson bundled against the cold was an admonishment to disregard personal comfort, to disrupt the peace, to hunker down, even now. It was the uniform that protesters wore in Minnesota when they stood in frigid weather to protest ICE. The clothes were not flamboyant. They were not a sop to respectability, but they painted a picture of the times, the people, and the politics. All right, let's move on. Next article. Trump order aims to boost weed killer targeted in health lawsuit. An executive order aimed at ramping up production of glyphosate set off alarms among supporters of Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. President Trump issued an executive order late Wednesday aimed at spurring the domestic production of glyphosate, a widely used weed killer that has figured in health lawsuits. The move immediately set off alarms among supporters of Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Make America Healthy Again movement and appeared to put Mr. Kennedy in an awkward position. This ingredient is the active ingredient in Roundup, which has been the target of tens of thousands of lawsuits that claim it causes non Hodgkin's lymphoma. In 2018, as a plaintiff's lawyer, Mr. Kennedy helped win a landmark $289 billion jury verdict against Monsanto, the maker of Roundup, in a case contending the company knew the weed killer caused cancer. But in a statement issued through a spokesman Wednesday night, the health secretary said he supported the president. Donald Trump's executive order puts America first where it matters most, our defense readiness and our food supply, Mr. Kennedy said in a statement. We must safeguard America's national security first, because all of our priorities depend on it. Mr. Trump's order invoked the Defense Production Act, a 1950s era law typically used in national emergencies to compel companies to produce certain materials or supplies that the president deems necessary for national security. Mr. Trump declared both glyphosate and phosphorus used to manufacture the weed killer critical to the national defense. Lack of access to glyphosate-based herbicides would critically jeopardize agricultural production, adding pressure to the domestic food system, Mr. Trump argued. He ordered that Agricultural Secretary, in consultation with the Defense Secretary, to determine the proper nationwide priorities and give them authority to compel production of the materials to ensure a continued and adequate supply of phosphorus and glyphosate-based herbicides if necessary. Some of Mr. Kennedy's supporters, as well as environmental groups, were furious. MAHA voters were promised health reform, not chemical entrenchment, said Vani Hari, a healthy eating advocate and supporter of Mr. Kennedy's nutritional agenda. She called the executive order a direct assault on MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, and a gift to pesticide and chemical industry lobbies at the expense of human health. Ken Cook, the president of and co-founder of an environmental working group, an advocacy organization that also supported parts of Mr. Kennedy's agenda, said, "I can't envision a bigger middle finger to every MAHA mom than this. Mr. Kennedy has taken an aggressive posture on pesticides in the past. The chemicals pollute our bodies the same way that they pollute the soil," he said in 2024. In a report issued last year, a commission he chaired to examine the causes of chronic disease singled out the ingredients and another pesticide, atrazine, as potentially harmful to children. Well, many experts say the risk of that pesticide to the general population is low. Bodies reviewing research have had differing conclusions. In 2015, the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified glyphosate as probably carcinogenic to humans. 2 years later, the Environmental Protection Agency said that the ingredient was not likely to be carcinogenic to humans. Late last year, a landmark study that had found the ingredient to be safe 25 years ago was retracted by the scientific journal that published it, undermining confidence in the science behind a weed killer that had become integral to American food production. It is used on soybeans, corn, and wheat, on specialty crops like almonds, and on cotton and in home gardens. The Defense Protection Act provides a pathway for companies to be shielded from certain liability suits, and Mr. Trump's order appeared to extend that protection to producers of that ingredient. The Supreme Court is set to hear arguments in weeks in a case that asks whether federal law shields pesticide manufacturers from such lawsuits. Last year, a coalition of environmental groups, MAHA activists, and Democratic lawmakers defeated a provision tucked into the government spending bill that would have shielded Bayer and other pesticide makers from payouts to plaintiffs. A similar provision has now been introduced in the draft Farm Bill. Brett Hartle, Director of Government Affairs for the Center for Biological Diversity, which has filed multiple lawsuits challenging the EPA's approval of the herbicide, said the provision raised red flags. It's alarming because it's clearly designed to offer a broad immunity, he said. Bayer, the German pharmaceutical and biotech giant that acquired Monsanto in 2018, announced on Tuesday that it had reached a tentative agreement that would pay plaintiffs $7.25 billion to settle tens of thousands of lawsuits that claimed Roundup caused cancer. The company maintains that the weed killer is safe and an essential tool for farmers. The company will continue to press its case in the Supreme Court. Bill Anderson, Bayer's chief executive, told investors on Tuesday, he said a favorable ruling would provide the tightest possible form of containment of litigation by settling existing cases and making future cases easier to win. In a statement on behalf of Monsanto, a Bayer spokesman said that Mr. Trump's executive order reinforces the critical need for U.S. farmers to have access to essential domestically produced crop protection tools. The company will comply with this order to produce the pesticide and elemental phosphorus, he said. Okay, and this will probably be the last article for today. Donald J. Trump International Airport. The president's company trademarked it. The Trump Organization said the move was necessary to protect the brand as Florida prepares to rename an airport after the president. President Trump has affixed his name on skyscrapers, golf clubs, and even the John F. Kennedy Center for Performing Arts, a property honoring an entirely different president. The Trump brand may now have yet another landing spot, U.S. airports. Mr. Trump's family business recently filed trademark applications for potential airport names, records show, an effort to preserve control over the use of his brand. The applications filed last week with the United States Patent and Trademark Office state a claim to three names: President Donald J. Trump International Airport, Donald J. Trump International Airport, and DJT, the possible airport code. The application also sought to use the name in connection with a variety of airport themed merchandise, including luggage, animal carriers, and shoes for protection of airline passengers' feet during airport security screening. The Trump Organization filed the application, a statement from the company said, because the Trump name is the most infringed trademark in the world. The application coincides with Florida's Republicans advancing legislation to rebrand the Palm Beach, Florida airport, which Mr. Trump frequents on his way in and out of his nearby Mar-a-Lago estate, as the President Donald J. Trump International Airport. The Trump administration has also pushed to rename Washington Dulles Airport after the president. A Trump-branded airport would break presidential and aviation norms. Other presidents had to wait years after leaving office or to die to have airports bear their names. And when other airports are named, a public authority or government agency almost always handles the trademark process, according to Josh Gerben, a trademark lawyer who discovered the Trump filings. The fact pattern here is unusual, to say the least, said Mr. Gerben, who added that he gave kudos to the person who filed this trademark. It's very thorough. While Mr. Gerben noted that the trademarks could provide a money-making opportunity for the president, Mr. Trump's company has vowed not to charge for the use of his name on the Palm Beach airport. To be clear, the president and his family will not receive any royalty, licensing fee, or financial consideration whatsoever from the proposed airport renaming, the Trump Organization said in its statement, adding that Mr. Trump was deeply honored that the people of Florida are considering renaming his hometown airport in his honor. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Naya Frontier radio reading service. Your reader today has been Mark Grier. Thank you so much for listening.